There are going to be more frequent and intense extreme events. It's already started to happen. We've been witnessing it here in Australia with all the flooding, but the bushfires in southern Australia were also an example of the effects of climate change. I guess development and adaptation efforts have already reduced vulnerability to some extent, but much more can be done. So everywhere, the most vulnerable people are disproportionately affected. And these people tend to be the aged, the very young, people with disabilities, and the economically disadvantaged. For example, heat waves are going to increase in cities, and we often find that some of the most economically and socially marginalized people live in dense urban environments. We have health effects from the pollution from wildfires. We have disease from flooding. And this is in addition to the increased mental health and financial stress of disasters on families. So these things are going to affect us more and more. One of the things that I'm concerned about is how we can use urban greening, trees and other vegetation, to provide more local cooling in times of heat waves.
We're experiencing the aftermath, and I feel that it will last a long while, of perhaps ill-managed building of homes on floodplains, etc. Generations of people who've loved living in those areas, but which have become incredibly dangerous, unsafe places to live. People have lost their lives, and we'll be cleaning up all of that mess, both mentally and physically, for a long time to come. Your planning would help stop this, won't it?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, I think that there are a few things that we need to think about, and I'll just focus on vegetation in this regard. One is, we've stripped a lot of the vegetation, the trees, from our landscape. So in those the higher aspects of the catchment, if we can be replanting as much as possible, reforesting to retain some of the water, then when we do have heavy, downpours, that can help retain some of the water. But also in a city environment, we're densifying, where we have more hard surfaces. Water has to run off in a really, concentrated fashion. Because we're building, now there's a trend to small lot development, and there's almost no room for trees on those lots. And so, we're having, less retention of water. But we also have less shade on those houses. Almost every house in a typical suburb 30 years ago would have had a few shade trees. And if people were smart, they would have put them on the western side of their house.
In particular, what does this future planning or bad planning of our past, what does this specifically mean for older people? Well,
older Australians are physically more vulnerable to heat stress for physiological reasons. They often have a greater degree of some type of disability, and a certain portion are financially unable to modify their home environment to cope with increased heat. And many people don't even like to use air conditioning. They find that it's uncomfortable. They can't regulate it properly. Often they can't easily temporarily relocate during a heat wave. So a traditional way of dealing with heat waves has been, go to the shopping center for the day. But, if you don't have your license, if you don't want to mingle with a lot of other people, if you don't want to walk around all the time because they don't have a lot of benches in some of these shopping centers, it's not really a good alternative. We need to have something that works for people both in retirement villages and in their neighborhoods.
So you know how to plan it. You know what people want. Who should be responsible for this?
Well, look, I think local councils have a major role to play, but I think that we also need an acknowledgement from all levels of government that it's going to cost us if we're going to adjust to climate change, and that these costs can't be borne by just one sector, not just local councils, not just individuals, but there needs to be a lot more thought into it. And one thing I'll point to is the need possibly to buy back some properties, put them in a communal reserve, and help people relocate in really dire situations.
It's really sad to watch, not night after night, but on a regular basis, drones or low-flying helicopters that have taken pictures of, in particular, the outer suburbs of, say, Sydney, and they go over this vast area of just little boxes, remember the record little boxes? Well, that's what they are, and they're McMansions, that's one word for them, not a tree to be seen, as we've been discussing, but this close together and no trees, too close together. I mean, you'd be able to hear each other snore, surely, in these places. And then they do that ridiculously stupid thing of who tells them to put dark roofs on top of these houses? This is 2022. When are we going to learn?
One of the things that we've been doing is running a pilot study with aged care facilities to develop heat adaptation plans. With a focus on using green infrastructure, so plants, artificial wetlands, shade shelters, and to reduce hard surfaces that reflect the heat. And we've used 2 aged care facilities on the Sunshine Coast for the pilot study. We've deployed heat sensors in these aged care facilities to find out what are the hottest places in the center. And we've developed an audit tool that examines the role of greenery in each of these centers, accessibility, and also safety considerations. So, for example, it's pointless to plant a big tree that will have roots that then disrupt walking paths and cause a fall hazard. So there has to be a lot of thinking going into the combination of things that make a good outdoor living space. Planting greenery on a western wall will reduce the interior heat and reduce air conditioning costs, or even maybe the need to have air conditioning. We found that some of the hottest places were the entrances of aged care facilities where people wait to get picked up or dropped off. And, there's a lot of asphalt. Often there's no shade. We've also identified ways to use vegetation to foster residents' interest and to enhance wayfinding. For example, sections dividing an aged care facility into sectors where there would be different vegetation themes. So one theme might be flowering gardens. Another theme might be a community vegetable garden where everybody works on a raised garden bed that makes it easier for people to interact with it. Maybe bird attracting flowering shrubs because people love to watch birds. And placed where people can see them both from the inside or they can go out and interact with these spaces. So it's a challenge to do, that kind of, to take all those things into account.
What else can we do? Claudia?
Well, with only 10% of older people living in aged care facilities and a strong desire and a trend to age in place, I guess we hope that, our study will provide lessons for urban communities in general about how to use green infrastructure and reduce hard surfaces to improve the thermal comfort of our outdoor spaces. And this has multiple benefits, reduces stress, increases mental well-being. People love to gather in areas and have social interaction.